Hello, name's Anon. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. Today, as you can tell, we'll be doing a Wizard of Legend Robe tier list, of course, as per usual, proceeding in in-game order. But first, a preface. Savile is a vendor NPC that you can encounter over the course of your run. When you do, he will offer you to trade a bunch of your health as well as your cold, hard-earned dungeon cash to upgrade that sweet robe of yours, provided that you actually carry a robe that can be upgraded. Now, most robes in the game can be upgraded, with the exception of a few quirky, challenging, or gimmicky robes. When he does upgrade your robe, i.e. infuse it with this tailor magic, not only will it become much more fancy, glowing and sparkling, which is fucking gorgeous, if you excuse my language, but also, he will permanently raise the stat increases that robe would otherwise grant you by a whopping 50% each, which is, of course, especially impactful for those robes that grant you a particularly large quantity of one or two stats that you're really looking for. That having been said, I'd say let's kick things off with this beautiful shiny red robe over here, which is so ironically called Hope. The Hope robe will grant you a 5% max health increase, a 10% run speed increase, a 5% damage, and crit chance increase likewise, if you have already unlocked the Vigor, Venture, Pace, Awe, and Rule outfits. Now, I have a lot to say about this robe. This is the de facto default robe. Every new Wizard of Legend, trademark, starts things off with this robe on. Now, when you actually start off the game, you don't fulfill the named condition here, so this robe has literally not a single positive effect for you besides looking red and shiny. Which is obviously horrible, right? You want to fulfill that condition as soon as possible. As a new player, that is especially hard to do. Robes are very expensive and certainly not your focus. You may not even know that you can purchase new robes because they are pretty well hidden inside of the lobby where you can unlock your items. I know that I didn't know about them for the longest time, and even when I got to know about them, they were just so outrageously expensive compared to the shiny new items and abilities. I pretty much never invested into them. I just had to force myself at some point to look at new robes. And I got quite surprised to know that robes actually can have an effect, and they're not here to just change your appearance overall. So another problem with the Hope robe, of course, that results from that is not only do you have to unlock like a handful of robes, but 5 of them. Vigor, Venture, Pace, Awe, and Rule, all of which are much better, much more interesting and appealing robes than the Hope robe, which is more of an all-rounder. It doesn't do anything super cool, super fancy, doesn't significantly change your playstyle or affect the overall outcome of your run, so it's not appealing even when enhanced. The main problem here is not that you start things off with this and you switch to another robe and you pretty much never look back at the Hope robe, as you believe you already know that it won't do anything for you, it's just there for coloration. Which is quite a large problem, admittedly, but the main problem is just how horrible it is, how much it pales in comparison to its unlock requirements. Let's actually look into the base stats here that this robe grants you. 5% increased max health, that's fine to a new player, but then again, why do I have to unlock 5 robes to unlock that effect? It shouldn't be like that whatsoever. All-rounders are supposed to be there to ease in new players and not to be there for intermediates or even experts, right, or veterans. That is not at all the purpose of an all-rounder. The 5% max health overall in and of itself isn't a very good stat. Sure, it may come in handy for newer players to be able to hit slightly more frequently. 5% is really not a whole lot of extra health. I believe that's 25 right out of the gates, which is just oh man, don't even think about that too hard. It's really not a whole lot. It is less than 1 hit on later floors, which is just, it pains me to say. This is really horrible. Although you can arguably utilize max health, you can trade it, right, for certain thingies. Also, having a little bit of extra max health can be nice when picking up a lot of cursed relics, which typically new players don't do, right? You want to stay away from that shit. If if you're a smart player, because you know that you're pretty bad at the game, and this will only make things harder for you, or lead to you losing that run much faster in the case of the most OP, but also most detrimental, right? Potentially detrimental items like Double Trouble or Double Toy, for example, which straight up double or quadruple, depending on if you've got the counterpart, the damage that you take. So max health is pretty useless, even for those edge cases where you would want a little bit of extra max health, for example to hurt yourself, to poke a Midas item, to gain some gold, and yada yada yada, but 5% is just not enough. Even when enhanced, that's an extra 2.5% max health. It's really not worth it at all. That is nothing. There's a rope that does that way better for you. Let's move on to the next element here, which is 10% increased run speed. Run speed is about the most useless stat increase that you can get off of a rope or anything, really, because what does it really do? Well, it clearly and arguably shortens the time between rooms. We are essentially playing a dungeon crawler, right? So there is fighting segments and there is walking segments where you don't generally fight, sometimes parkour segments, but generally just regular arm walking, nothing hanging around, just walking towards the next room, looking for the next room to go to. I've already cleared out all these rooms and now I'm just walking towards the boss room, towards the shop or wherever. These segments can be shortened, significantly shortened. Don't get me wrong, with that 10% extra run speed, which is quite an outrageously large amount of stats here compared to the others, which will only be 5%, but that's beside the point. So not only is it offensively right? Offensively meh, and just not very useful, but also let's think about this in depth. What does run speed do for you mid-combat? Nothing, really, because you cannot run while casting abilities effectively, right? You will have to stand still to aim, and then you will have to start walking again and wait a few seconds for the run animation to kick in. Because unfortunately in Wizard of Legend you don't just hold down a button and you run automatically. No, it just takes a few seconds of straight walking, straight uninterrupted walking, that is, for you to be able to run. You can't cast abilities because the second you cast an ability, you're gonna stand still and then you have to walk again and wait a few seconds. Yada yada yada. Also, let's take into account the regular rooms. They are generally very small, or they contain a lot of extra obstacles or pits or even traps, which is by far, bar none, the worst case for that particular scenario, because you can't just run around a room that isn't even like a square shape. It has a lot of holes in it, or it has a lot of obstacles in it. All those goddamn traps, or even barrels, for example, you definitely won't be able to run in one of those rooms. You have a very tight and closed space with a lot of enemies focused solely on you. Additionally, those aforementioned traps, think ice traps for example, you wouldn't want to risk being hit at all. Even with a fairly defensive build, like a summon based build, say you enter a room, the fighting sequence starts, you cast all your summons, and then you just run around and hope for the summons to kill everything. First of all, summons are generally not that strong, they take a long time to kill everything, they might not even survive, they don't have the greatest amount of health right out of the gates either, which downscales effectively, right? The longer you play, the more enemies will hit faster and faster and with heavier attacks, so your summons will get worse over time. That strategy won't work over time. Even for bosses, going away from these tiny regular rooms, right? The run speed only helps you circle them effectively, right? It doesn't generally help you get faster towards them. Say you have a purely melee focused build, you may want to have some run speed, but then you have to have a way to run all the time, pretty much, right? Or to be able to proc your run faster. But you can just solve that issue by granting yourself extra movement speed, buying items, or using abilities like Scales of Babylon, for example. So the run speed increase off of your robe isn't a necessity at all, even in that particular edge case where you would probably really want some extra movement speed to be able to get to the boss in time, right? When they are having their down phase, so you can smash their brains in with your melee abilities. Also, as much as it pains me to say, there is a rope that grants you run speed, but that is straight up better at what this rope tries to do. So even for that stat, there's a rope that does the same thing that you may want to have this rope do for you, but better. Next stat is 5% damage increase, which is actually very good. That's actually a very reasonable damage increase for a starting rope without making it too overpowered or anything. Damage increases, raw damage increases are guaranteed on all actions, so that's very useful, very nice. Unless you have like a status effect focus build, because you can't effectively increase their base damage unless you have one of a handful of relics, but your base damage does not affect how much damage those status effects deal whatsoever, unfortunately. So damage is very useful, but again, there's a rope that of course grants you more than 5% damage increase out of the gates, so this is nothing wild or anything. It's definitely going to help you out though overall. And finally, we have a 5% crit chance increase. I don't know why in the hell you would want that. I mean, arguably this is pretty much the only rope that grants you a slight damage and crit chance increase. So if that's what you're going for whatever ungodly reason, sure, Hope Rope will do. But that's pretty much the only case that I can think of why you would ever want to pick this rope. There are ropes for purely focusing on damage increases, there are ropes for purely focusing on crit chance increases. Having both doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because damage increases, base damage increases are reliable, crit chance increases are unreliable. So one of them is deterministic and the other one is whatever the opposite of that may be. Crit chance overall is a whole lot less reliable, as it only increases a chance to deal more damage, which is straight up worse all the time, pretty much, than straight up increasing your damage. Guaranteed. Every time. You wouldn't want to have both on the same build, generally. Although I usually preach when you're running a build that already has a fairly high base damage, you notice that you can kill enemies quite quickly, and you just need greater boss killing potential. Adding slight amounts of extra base damage in these intervals, like 5% extra base damage, 1% extra base damage, 20 is actually quite a significant amount, but you get what I'm saying here, isn't as great as adding a large amount of crit chance by picking up a Dark Katana, for example. That is going to significantly increase your base damage, even when compared to an extra 20% extra base damage up, for example, probably, I don't know, a luxury handbag, something like that. So while it is very nice generally to have a higher amount of base damage and a high amount of crit chance together, ultimately, at the end of your run, that is, you can't really force it in your run, and just assuming that you'll be getting both in the same run using the Hope Rope, it's not that good. It's generally much better to have a strong stat increase off of your rope, in particular, or your starter relic, or even your abilities, at the beginning of the run, because the beginning is generally much harder, especially when taking into account you potentially starting things off with very weak abilities, say when randomizing your build. So you would need a lot of extra base damage or extra damage per second, effective damage per second dealt, and crit chance just ain't gonna cut it whatsoever. It's more of a late game luxury when you can afford it type of thing. Taking into account the condition, which is quite hard to fulfill for a new player, it's just so expensive to unlock these ropes. Vigor, Venture, Pace, or Unreal, I mean, come on. These ropes are generally much better. There's a rope for pretty much all of these stats granted that does whatever this rope tries to do with that stat way better, including the ropes that you unlock with this rope, or the unlocks, the forced unlocks that come with unlocking quote-unquote this rope. This thing is either dead center of the tier list as the de facto default template for all other ropes to be compared to, or it is C tier in my book, because I don't consider this very good or reliable at all. I'll put it into C tier. My de facto rope that I like comparing ropes to generally is the next rope on the list, which is gonna be Patience. Patience is a fantastic rope. It is the defensive equivalent to the Hope Rope. So likewise does it grant you 5% extra max health and 10% extra run speed, which is right? But here it makes a lot more sense in the context of the Patience rope, because it has a defensive focus. Instead of granting you 5% extra damage and crit chance, it'll grant you 5% extra armor and evasion chance, which is way stronger. The armor again is reliant, it's always there, and it will have a huge impact on your run overall, much more than having an equally large amount or an equally tiny amount of a base damage increase overall. I feel, especially to a new player, this is just so much more important. Having high base damage is the ultimate goal for intermediate or expert players, but when you don't really know how to translate your build into maximum value, how to get maximum damage out of everything, which items to choose, which abilities to choose, when to upgrade what, it's just too risky to go all in on damage, or to even split between damage and defense. It's just too rough. And just starting off with a little bit of extra chance to not take any damage in the case of evasion, just straight up not take any damage and also not be stun locked, or with just straight up not taking as much damage with the armor boost here is amazing. For new players, this thing therefore goes right here, dead center into the middle. This is my de facto template for a decent robe that you can slap on any build. It's gonna be an all-rounder, it's gonna do great, especially for new players, but also for experts alike. Armor is just a lot more abusable, evasion is also quite abusable, arguably, but similarly to the crit chance, it's just a chance-based effect. Alright, don't rely on it too much. You can do that, you can go goofy with it, but I don't really like doing that generally. I like versatility, and I like when things are generally good, and you can do pretty much anything with anything you want. Patience Robe is a whole lot better for that compared to the Hope Robe. Talking about the unlock condition here, it's slightly different. You still need to unlock the Vigor and Venture Robe, but instead of the Pace, Awe, and Rule outfits, you additionally, if you want to have the Patience effect, you need to unlock Grit, Shift, and Temper outfits, which can arguably be better defensive options than the Patience Robe. But hey, I'll leave it out in the room. You can still use Patience, and I'm not going to condemn you at all. Whereas Hope users, I'm generally looking iffy onto. Right? I don't really like to see that. Nope, not at all. Without that condition being fulfilled, obviously, similarly to the Hope Robe, this is absolute garbage. It does nothing for you. But even baseline, this thing is blue, and in my opinion, blue is better than red. So, hey, it's better either way. Let's move on to the next robe, which is Vigor. I believe that's this blue shade over here, an absolutely gorgeous shade of light blue, my favorite in the game in fact. The Vigor robe will grant you a 10% max health increase and a 10% increase to your cooldown reduction. The max health increase is already twice as good as both Hope and Patience, which is amazing, right? Because that's an extra 50 health out of the gates entering a run, which is especially useful to a new player. That allows for a lot more leeway for making mistakes, like absolute amateur mistake. Number one, falling into pits all the time, running into enemies, getting cancelled, getting stun locked by lancers and rogues. It's gonna happen, and it's gonna happen a lot, especially as a new player. And Vigor Robe is here to at least bounce back a little bit, to help you catch a break, at least occasionally, to live a little longer, to maybe make it to that next shot with that sweet healing potion that you've been desperately looking for so long. And that's why it's amazing for new players in my book, probably even better than the Patience robe, but that remains up for debate. I would say this is a better robe for intermediate new players, if that makes sense. So if you're not completely fresh to the game, I feel this robe can definitely help you out a lot because of the second stat here, the cooldown reduction granted, which is pretty much the best stat in the game. Cooldown reduction makes any build more versatile unless the focus of your build is literally not abilities at all, or abilities that don't have a cooldown at all, like a basic Ocarina build that somehow doesn't rely on any other abilities, or a dash build that doesn't care about anything else and doesn't have a cooldown. In which case, I'm asking you, why would you run Vigor Robe at that point? Because you have clearly played the game for a while, but hey, generally, cooldown reduction is incredible. It makes any build better, it shortens the time you need to wait on all abilities across the board, literally makes any build deal more damage or be more defensive depending on what you actually need to get from your abilities. Either way, you will get it, guaranteed. The only thing it doesn't do, unfortunately, is shorten the cooldown of relics and the likes, but hey, that would be just way too busted. It's already incredibly powerful and my go-to stat increase overall. So Vigor Robe automatically is above average due to that hefty amount of cooldown reduction. The max health just compensates for a more aggressive playstyle where you make more mistakes, maybe you take more damage, but you go pretty hard and you try to, you know, finish that stage 1, that stage 2, that stage 3, try to actually get past the first boss. This robe, to me, encapsulates the newbie experience way more than a patience or hope robe, which make you gradually take less damage or gradually deal more damage and thereby gradually speed you up. The Vigor robe will aggressively try to speed things up for you, either making you overcommit the fuck out of your run and then die, or making you just be way too tanky and pretty much full health all the time. I have like 300 plus HP all the time because of your max health and of those frequent healing potions that you can purchase for high value, and I like that a lot. I think that this robe overall, it offers something for both kinds of players, both new and more experienced players. To me, as an experienced player, the corner rotation is obviously much more interesting, much more important than the max health, but also max health can definitely help you take those great out trades with Midas items or with cursed relics, and I really like that. Personally, I like at least having the option. I won't put it into A tier, this will go at the top of B tier, because even with that large amount of cooldown reduction granted, max health is a pretty much useless stat overall. This may be an okay row, like pretty high A tier for intermediate players, because it will definitely help them around that mid game when they need the health and the cooldown reduction most to both not be kicked out of the game essentially by taking too much damage at once by making a sloppy mistake, or when not having enough DPS because they lack some sort of stat that they didn't take into account early, like cooldown reduction for example. That's gonna help clean things up. But to me, as like a very experienced player, Vigor Robe is you know, you can use it, sure, it's gonna work for you, but what you gonna do with all that max health? Why don't you just pick extra base damage, for example, right? With that cooldown reduction, that would go together like a fine wine and cheese, right? Let's move on to the Grit Robe. Next on the list, right here, easily identifiable. Grit Robe used to be one of my favorite robes when I was a new player, especially. I used this all the time. This and a certain other robe we'll get to in a second here. Grit Robe grants you a 10% buff to your armor and 10% buff to healing received, which is the perfect defensive robe in my book. Okay, fight me till the death. I don't care. 10% armor means you take an insane amount of less damage over the course of your entire run, however short that run may be. So even when you're a complete beginner and you've never even made it past the first boss, this is going to be incredibly helpful. The healing received especially helps new players because you will go for that healing potion probably before the first boss or shortly thereafter, right? That's what new players generally do. They might, depending on skill gap here, they might have to, or skill level rather, they might have to purchase a healing potion every single stage, and you get more healing just using this robe, which is amazing. That's amazing value. More healing translates into more health, but you also have more armor, so you'll take less damage, so you'll have much more of that more health from healing more, and it compensates a little bit for the decline in heal quality, because every time you purchase a healing pot, it heals you for drastically less the next time around, right? So Grit Robe is absolutely perfect for new players, and even for experienced players, that huge armor buff is amazing. It's very, very good. Even the healing received can be very good if you run a certain build that relies on healing yourself by being hit first and then using an ability to hit frequently. For example, using the Blades of Sympathy, right? That's amazing. Or for heal builds that focus on collecting gems to heal, the armor is always useful regardless of what you're doing. You can play the most aggressive build in the world, and this robe is gonna compensate for all of that aggression, generally speaking, as well as you're playing in a rather smart way. You don't have to play perfectly, but just play okay, so you don't just overcommit so much that you literally just kill yourself. This thing is A tier, very, very strong, probably the best defensive robe in the game. To me it is, certainly, but that's up for debate. Let's look at the next robe, which is actually my old favorite robe in the game. I play with this all the time, especially when playing with new players and multiplayer, because it's just so incredibly abusable. Even to a player who's already unlocked everything in the game, this robe is just so incredibly abusable. It's Avarice, the white robe over here. Avarice grants you 10% extra gold gain. That's very nice, right? That's perfect for a Midas type of build. And +1 gem gain on every gem that is dropped, that is generated, that you pick up. That's insane. That last part, that interests me in particular as a not new player, right? But also as a new player, the gem gain is amazing. It means I can purchase more stuff faster. And the gold gain is cool because then I can purchase more items, more healing parts. I'm definitely going to be struggling with that because I'm going to be broke all the time because I have to buy healing potions because I make so many mistakes because I'm a new player. Extra gold gain definitely helps with that. It doesn't compensate really because 10% is not a whole lot when you take into account how much damage a new player might just take over the course of a floor. But hey, it's definitely going to help you a little bit get to that next healing potion, a little bit get to that next boss, a little bit get more gems, and then way more gems because you have the Avarice Robe, right? That's amazing. And then you can... This is essentially the roguelite robe, in my opinion, okay? You use this, you grind as long as you can, you get all those gems, you die, you purchase, you do it all over again. And this is how to hasten up drastically the unlock process of... there's like large keystone... I was gonna say robes, but hey, are there really keystone robes when you use this and you're trying to unlock everything? Just those like large keystone abilities that you really want to have, or like a cool signature, or you want to have all the signatures, you want to have a bunch of options, you want to have a very strong starter relic like a lemur's leaf or something, so you make it further. This thing does it all for you as a new player, but even as an experienced player, which is much more interesting to me personally here for the context of this tier list, this robe is cool. It's just so cool. Gold gain is incredibly abusable. Just slap a Midas starter relic on here and you're going to be golden. You're going to be full items, decked out to the T pretty much all the time with some of the best items in the game. You're going to have infinite possibilities virtually. You're not going to be dealing a lot of extra base damage or something like that. You're not going to be very tanky, but you don't really need that as an experienced player. And the gold gain is just, it grants you a massive boost ahead of any other player. But to me, the most interesting part is actually hidden in plain sight. The +1 gem gain is incredibly busted. Even when you have everything unlocked in the game, start things off with an item, a certain item that heals you whenever you pick up a gem. Take the jewelry box or the necklace. I don't remember the name off the top of my head. Was it like Chakram's necklace or something? I don't recall, but those things are just so busted because gem healing is insane. It is so insane. And Avarice is pretty much the all-rounder for anything around currencies, anything around making a build focused on currencies and acquiring currencies and abusing them in fantastic ways, really. So where would I say will Avarice go overall? I would say Avarice is at the very top of B tier. I wouldn't say this is like a great robe. It is certainly a robe that goes with any build because gold gain is universally amazing. Even when you're playing like boss rush, even when you're looping, unless you're playing PvP, of course, in which case there is no gold drops, there is no gem drops, there's no point building around that. This robe is fan-flabbering-tastic. It is really good. I'm really considering putting it at the bottom of A tier, but I wouldn't use this as a generalist type of build because gold gain alone isn't incredibly viable, right? It is great, but you're still gonna be left to randomness for the most part here, whether you actually find good items. And most great items, we're talking great, right? The best of the best are cursed relics anyway, so you would still be left at the mercy of Nox at the end of the day. Arguably, you could start around with the Nox token, and you would be good to go overall, but then you benefit a little less from the fact that you can upgrade your robe and stuff for money and find healing parts. To a new player, Avarice is S tier, undoubtedly, in my book. Absolutely fantastic. But to me as an experienced player, it's not much more than a gimmick overall, really. The gold gain is nice, but if I wanted to replicate that effect, I would just pick a better robe, a much more interesting and delicate robe, and slap a Midas item on the build as my starter relic. Okay, let's move on to another robe here with the beautiful pink shiny spirit robe, which is really just a counterpart to the grit robe if you think about it, and I find it very hard to determine which of these is better and which of them is more consistent. To me, it's grit robe, but to you, it may be spirit robe. Spirit Robe grants you a 20% increased healing received, so it's twice as good in that regard than Grit Robe, and a 10% chance, extra chance, that is, because you do have a base chance of this, of critically healing. So of a healing orb, for example, or healing potion to heal for twice as much, taking into account, of course, the previously applied 20% healing bonus to that source. That's an insane amount of healing. This thing doesn't make you take less damage, but the healing it generates, especially with like a gem heal build, or a heal on crit hit, or heal after being hit with the Blades of Sympathy build, this thing makes it pretty much a cakewalk to play a shield or heal focused build overall. Takeout box with this is one of my favorite synergies in the game. It's just so fucking amazing. You heal full, right? Easily. Very, very easy, just by picking up a bunch of health orbs. And then the takeout box also generates a huge shield, which gets even larger because of the heal boost that you grant yourself using the Spirit Robe. I love that so much. I dare say I love this more than the Grit Robe, even though historically I've used Grit Robe for years as one of my favorite robes. Spirit Robe is just so amazing, so creative. It's not really super creative in that, yeah, it's just healing, duh, but you can do a lot with that in this game overall. You don't have items that make you deal damage on being healed, for example, but you have, beside that, pretty much anything else that you can think of, right? Healing related. Take damage to gain heal, do damage to gain heal, find thingies to gain heal, or just heal by existing, right? Very cool stuff. This thing is A tier all the way. I also especially love the enhancement here because it's super impactful. Overall, Grit Robe grants you 2 plus 10%, and the Spirit Robe grants you a plus 20% healing received. Upgrading that is amazing. 30% healing received, 15% chance to crit heal. That's ridiculously defensively strong. This thing is A tier all the way for sure. Moving on to the Pace Robe. I think that's this one, the green one over here. Pace Robe grants you 15% extra run speed and minus 30% sprint delay. So you will sprint much more frequently because you don't have to wait as many seconds for the sprint to kick in. As we have previously discussed, sprinting generally isn't very useful. Lowering your sprint delay, on the other hand, can be very, very important during boss fights specifically, because bosses attack you in these waves of attacks, right? Very fast sequence of attacks. The longer your run goes on for, the more you loop, the more important, the more valuable this particular resource will become for you, this particular stat increase, or decrease in this case of the delay. Especially into Final Phase Sora, and we're talking about the secret phase here, of course, sprint delay can be amazing, but still very risky to use. You really have to know what you're doing. You really have to put all your faith in God, my friend. Because goddamn, if you're not going to use that dash at least occasionally, whoo, some attacks will be nigh impossible to avoid, and sprinting alone is generally not good enough to just dance around bosses non-stop, right? It works for the regular bosses, it works when you don't loop, but the second you start looping, you really have to know your shit. And I personally can't say I really do. I find sprinting way too stressful, way too difficult to do consistently. Just walking around sprinting regularly and then dashing occasionally, it's just way more reliable and way easier to do consistently than relying on only sprinting. No, of course, nobody's saying that you have to only sprint. This thing makes you more versatile in how you handle movement and dodging. But that in and of itself isn't super important, I find. The extra run speed, 15%, is of course a lot. That is a ton of extra run speed. It's really going to shorten the time between rooms. That is very nice in this particular case, unlike the Patience and Hope Robe. Bashing those again. It significantly shortens the time you spend on stages, and it significantly helps you dodge enemy attacks. But I would argue there are so many elements in the game. Pun intended, right? So many relics, so many abilities, and even robes and effects like evasion. The fact that this is a stat that exists in the game that straight up allow you to just neglect all damage, all abilities flying your way, projectile destruction of just, you know, everything with like an Inferno Beam, for example. the fact that all these tools exist in the game to defend yourself and to keep yourself alive, literal invulnerability, okay, while dashing with a limo sleeve or with the breezy grey, it makes this robe a whole lot less important overall. And while otherwise I would rank it rather high up in the tier list, you know, taking into account what it actually does compared to other way more impactful, way more run modifying, way more run changing robes, I must put this a little lower here. So it will go into B tier as it is effectively only a boss helper or a way to just not spend so much time walking around, goofing around in dungeons, which I don't personally value much. Temper Robe is next, which is amazing, because Temper Robe happens to be my favorite robe in the game, and pretty much the most versatile in the game as well. Temper Robe grants you a 15% cooldown reduction. That's the maximum here. Last one that we had previously was the Vigor Robe at 10%, and additionally, it grants you a plus 10% to run speed. Again, one of the most useless stats in the game, but hey, the thing is, Temper Robe not only shortens the time you spend walking between fighting sections, right? I.e. walking between rooms and like vendors and stuff, but also it shortens the time you spend inside of fighting sequences by drastically reducing your cooldowns. 15% is quite alright. When enhancing it, you get an extra 7.5% cooldown reduction. That is very, very, very much. That is above 20% cooldown reduction. 20% plus minus anything is pretty much the golden standard for what a cursed relic should do, and they come at huge downsides, generally speaking. So getting plus 20% alone off of a robe that you carry, that you invested into, right? Or fuck it, you don't even have to upgrade it, just get a very cheap item that grants you like an extra 5% correction. That should really not be a big deal. There's plenty of those in the game. Achieving 20% off of that alone is nuts. It is so good, makes literally any build so much better. It straight up enables certain abilities that otherwise would have a very long cooldown. Abilities with charges on them, for example, gain an absolutely mind-boggling like effect off of this, and it's just so good. It's so good. It's S tier all the way. Goes with literally any build. The run speed is actually complementing the cooldown reduction here, not only because of the name, well, it's the Temper Robe, it makes you fast, right? But also, when you clear rooms so much faster, you'll spend a lot more time walking between rooms doing nothing, and the movement speed actually helps here, unlike with the Pace Robe, for example, which doesn't actually actively help you in those fighting sequences, only in the time in between. It shortens the time. Cool, but here I get the best of both worlds, offense and utility, which is amazing. That's just great. I mean, can you hate this robe? I really love this thing. Moving on to Shift Robe, the purple robe over here. Shift Robe, besides looking quite nice, grants you a 10% evasion chance and a 5% extra crit chance. 5% crit chance! How much is that? Well, nothing, really. It's just as good, or rather, just as bad as a Hope Robe crit chance increase, which grants you a whole lot more stats overall combined, right? Hope Robe grants you 5, 5, 5, and 10, whereas the Shift Robe only grants you 10 and 5. The 10% evasion chance is really the main focus here. Not sure about the crit chance at all. You can pretty much cut that from this robe. The thing is, this is the wind robe in the game. If you want to go full wind, you're probably picking this or Temper Robe, really. Because wind abilities generally hit quite frequently. They deal very poor base damage, so you want them to crit, but also increase their base damage. Base damage increases are a dime a dozen in Wizard of Legend. You will find them over the course of the run, period. At some point, right? You're bound to do it. You can even just start off with like the pinwheel, right? As you're starting, like if you're running a full wind build or like a Dark Katana or something like that, and you get a huge amount of extra value off of that fact alone, that you just start off with a better build. But overall, the crit chance isn't super impactful, even to wind abilities. Yeah, you kind of need it, but hey, that's not the main focus, otherwise it wouldn't just be a +5. The evasion is great. Wind likes to evade damage altogether, which is a chance, right? It's not armor, which is a typically earthen thing. Earth loves to be big, chunky, tanky, slow, and armor is perfect for that because then you take less damage. And not being cancelled by being hit is also perfect. Like having earthen aegis and stuff to get rid of projectiles and to keep enemies at bay, even if just slightly so, is great. But for wind, we try to just evade everything altogether by just granting ourselves a large amount of movement speed, pushing enemies around, slowing them down so they can't reach us. But all of those concepts, they fail, really, when you think about boss attacks, which are just waves of lots and lots and lots and lots of hits, covering large areas of the arena. Sure, you can run circles around them, sure, you can try to evade, but you don't have a guarantee. And it's really not that reliable. But hey, Wind is here to gamble, and Shift Rope is here to make it easier for them, getting that 10% evasion boost, or 15% in the case of the Shift Rope being enhanced, can be very nice, especially if you're going for an evasion-centric build, which that does actually work, to be fair. Like, you can run a full Wind build, or try to get that Neve's counter Ps and extra evasion from like evading Zephyr and stuff, or like a Vortex fail, and you're gonna do fairly well. In fact, this can be some of the most busted tech in the game, but there's only a handful of evasion items, and you really need all of them for this to come to fruition. And you really need to understand what you're doing, and you're gonna lower your base damage drastically by picking up those items or by not running better ropes. This thing is still pretty okay, I would say. I do not personally use it pretty much ever. I do like the color of it quite a lot though, but that's about as far as I'll go. Evasion is just too risky. I still believe it's better than Pace, but it's certainly worse than a very versatile rope focused around granting me more currencies, granting me more opportunities to do shit and to build around, especially. Let's move on to the R-Robe, one of the most infamous robes in the game. It's this very quirky yellow one over here, which looks like a minion. The R-Robe grants you a 10% crit chance increase and a whopping 25% crit damage increase. That alone is worth a robe, okay? You don't need the crit chance increase on top. Crit damage, a fourth extra crit damage. That is a ridiculous amount for abilities that hit once or like multiple times and hit at very large amounts of base damage, like a knockout boulder, an exploding fireball, or like a dragon fall and stuff like that. These abilities hit just so incredibly hard. That extra crit damage is gonna gain an insane amount of value. It's straight up unfair compared to other robes. The crit chance additionally is just the cherry on top, and the fact that it's not 5% but 10%, it's just an insult to all other previous robes like the Shift Robe, but also the Hope and Patience Robe again. 10%, that translates into 15 when upgraded, 25 upgrade that, and you just get too much value. It's just ridiculous. It's above 30% on a bonus from a rope. That is ridiculous when compared to the relics that exist in the game. This thing is S tier all the way, undoubtedly so. Offensively, incredible. If you rely on a build that wants to crit, you take this rope, period. There is no arguing, hey, well, maybe I'll take a Shift Rope because it grants me defense or something. No, you want more crit chance? Hey, you got it. It's more crit chance than with the others. But that's not the main focus. Really, if you want to crit, even if it's just to heal yourself, pick this. You get the best of both worlds. You get more chance to crit, so to proc whatever you want to do, and additionally, you deal more damage automatically doing that. So you can spec for a more defensive crit build with the Igos, for example, while also dealing ridiculous, unfair amounts of damage. This thing is better than Temper Rope for the builds that really need it, but generally Temper Rope is just way better, because it goes with literally anything, okay? You can crit more often if your cooldowns are lower, you can use your abilities more often, so you will crit more often, right? And you will deal more base damage, and base damage is generally more valuable than only hitting with an ability once, but critting on all hits. But hey, that's just an opinion, and obviously this is my favorite rope in the game, so it's gonna remain at the top of S tier, at least for the foreseeable future. Moving on to the second most ridiculous rope in the game, or to me personally, it is the most ridiculous rope in the game. It definitely trumps the all Robe here in all regards. The Fury Robe. Fury Robe grants you 20% increased signature charge rate. Let that sink in. Let that sink in. How much is that? How much is that for your favorite signature abilities? For your favorite signature charge generating abilities? We're talking about these all-stars, these triple S tier abilities like Glacial Spear, Exploding Fireball, Bolt Claymore. How much signature charge do they generate hitting 4 target dummies, right? Just target dummies. Just regular old target dummies, man. Hit them in the lobby, try it out. It's like half your signature bar plus 20%. For every single enemy hit, 20%. That is ridiculous, and it can be upgraded. And what's it gonna be? It's gonna be 30%. 30% extra signature charge rate. That's not all, but it's already ridiculous enough to have this be at the very top of all of the tier lists, because signature abilities are the most busted in the game. You literally get 100% cooldown reduction the second your signature bar is full. Effectively, you can use it right away, potentially even multiple times depending on your build. These do generally deal the largest amount of damage in the game. They do generally have the largest coverage in the game. They are generally the most versatile in the game. They contain a lot of jumps that are especially overpowered due to the iframes they grant you, so both defensively and offensively they are just ridiculous. Additionally, this also grants you plus 25% signature damage. This is the reliable version of an all Robe, essentially, and therefore very top of S tier. Top of top, couldn't be anywhere else. Probably deserves a tier in and of itself. This is so incredibly busted, and I love it. I absolutely love it. It enables so many abilities to just become your signature, or so many abilities to become your main signature charge generator. I'm looking especially at the standard Arcana category here, because it doesn't really matter what signature you pick. I mean, sure, you can go all out, you'll just be incredibly broken running Astral Dissonance or Exploding Fireball or something like that. Crushing Meteor, for example, that's especially fun. But hey, if that's not even your main focus, if you just want to make one of the many standard abilities work that otherwise don't really feel like they are fun, or you just want to exaggerate already amazing abilities like the aforementioned Bolt Climber, for example, a very prevalent example, then run Fury Robe and it's gonna do it by itself. You don't really need skill when you use this hero, you just destroy everything right away, as long as you manage that signature charge decently okay. The fact that you get so much signature charge for free on top of what you already generate compensates drastically for a large lack of skill at managing keeping that signature charge level up, right? Because the decay is never gonna trump the fact that you just make like 3/4 of a signature bar in the use of one ability. There's just no way the decay could ever catch up to you at that point. Let's move on to the Rule Robe. Oh boy, which one is it? I think it's this one. I like this shade of blue more, so it's probably this one. Rule Robe grants you 10% extra damage and 10% extra armor. It is as simple as that. Pretty damn good. Best of both worlds. Most reliable damage source, most reliable defense source. S tier all the way. I find it more reliable than the All Robe. I don't find the Rule Robe generally to be as impactful. Hear me out. These stat increases are ridiculous. 10% straight up more damage, 10% straight up more defense. It is amazing for either playstyle, or even if you want to mix both. This is the perfect connector for both of those. But when assembling a build, or when running any build, really, say I'm running an incredibly low base damage build, the 10% extra base damage might be nice. Sure, it's still a little bit of a stretch of the imagination how things are going to turn out, especially with like a randomized wind-only build, for example. But generally, when assembling a build, both consciously or when randomizing a build, I much prefer the Tempo Robe because it stands for flexibility. And flexibility of a different kind. It doesn't matter whether my ability has a cooldown of like 40 seconds, like a fucking Dragonfall or something comparable, or whether it has like 20 charges and it basically has the cooldown of like half a second. No, instead it's gonna make everything better. The Rule Robe still makes everything better, but you have to wait on that cooldown to take down. And I find that a lot more critical to how you overall handle your health pool, how you overall handle when to engage and when not to, how to deal the greatest amount of base damage. It's not crit, it's not base damage, it's cooldown reduction in my book. Alright, and Fury is the best robe in the game because of that literally 100% cooldown reduction. Then Tempo has got to be the second, for sure, over the Rule robe, even though Rule is just so damn sturdy and reliable. Have you ever truly lost a Rule robe run without doing dumb shit like taking double trouble and then going nuts? Does that ever really happen? Leave your comment down below, right? Tell me your history with this robe. I find it just so ridiculous. I love this thing. It's probably my second favorite robe in the game nowadays. It's just like a fully upgraded grit robe at that point. It's just so freaking good. Let's move on to Lever Robe, a very, very interesting robe. Is it this one? I think it's this one. Lever Robe grants you minus 50% max health, minus 50% damage, and minus 50% signature charge rate. It halves all your great reliable stats, essentially. But every time you defeat an enemy, it increases your stats, all of these three stats, by 0.25%. Up to a maximum of plus 50% of each stat. So the maximum is you inverting those initial stat downgrades. And when enhancing this robe, you can invert them to up to plus 75%. Plus 75% to your base max health, your base damage, and your base signature charge rate is the most busted anything can get in this game. Anything at all, including double trouble and the likes. But the downside is massive. It is drastic. Minus 50% and you only get 0.25% on every kill. That translates into, well, you need about 3 floors to reach neutral, right? If I recall correctly. Neutral or like a plus 10% on each. Luckily, it is not randomized which set of these gets increased, but all of them do. Otherwise, this route would just be complete randomness, essentially. And, well, who really likes that, right? So, actually, I think we may have made a mistake. Which one of these is level? Which one of these is patience? I find it kind of hard to tell. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this may be level, actually, and this may be patience, because the initial robes are probably way brighter. So I'll take this as the level robe from now on. Just don't mind me switching them real quick. I feel like level robe is amazing. It's super creative. It forces you to play different because of your incredibly low damage and high cooldowns and base signature charge rate. So it disables a whole lot of abilities right out of the gate, and therefore forces you to come up with a strategy. I love that gameplay wise, but overall this robe is just, oh my lord, it's so hard to use. It's so damn hard to make work. Unless you're an absolute expert at the game, or at least, bottom line, intermediate, and even then you're gonna make a lot of mistakes probably. This thing is just brutal to use. I don't really know where to rank it, because when it excels, this thing destroys everything in the game. But on average, it is just so damn clunky. I think I'll put it into... I don't feel like putting it into below average, do I? Well, it is below average, right? De facto, it is just way worse than any other robes. I'm still gonna be putting it above Whole Robe, because I really don't like Whole Robe that much, and at least Level Robe does scale, and it makes the gameplay more interesting. It's not better overall, but like, you do get out of that... well, yeah, well... I guess I can't make that argument. I guess it's gotta go lower down. It's not D tier for sure, because it does scale after all, and especially when you are a looping player, this thing can be amazing. For boss rush, it's obviously at the very bottom of the tier list, because you'll never get out of your hole. You never have even remotely enough enemies to get to like minus 40, minus 30. It's just not gonna happen. Not gonna happen at all, and it's a massive detriment to your run overall. But in a regular run, especially when looping, this thing is just so good. Which is the next? Let me actually check my list. Venture is the next on the list. Okay, Venture Robe grants you 10% increased base damage, 10% increased run speed, 10% cooldown reduction, and 40% max health down. Yikes! Oh my lord, that thing is oof, it is very rough to play with. You have to be at least on an intermediate level with quite a bit of Wizard of Legend experience to wield this thing without dying, at least occasionally, okay? Because this lowers your max health down to drastic levels, effectively halving it, okay? That is crazy. You die so quickly in this game, you have to pay a lot of attention, especially when picking up things like Double Trouble and the likes, items that make you take drastically more damage, that raise the crit chance of your enemies, for example, with the Clover, or that straight up cut that max health down even further, right? Especially in boss rush, this thing is a menace because the damage granted is fantastic. You get 2 major DPS increases, the 10% straight up base damage increase, which is amazing, right? We know that from the rule Robe, we love it, and the 10% cooldown reduction. So the best of both tempo and rule Robe combined. But also run speed additionally, so you can run circles around bosses in particular. This thing is pretty much a boss rush destroyer. In a regular run it's still very impactful, but a lot more dangerous overall. You really have to know your stuff when wielding this robe, so it's nothing but a tool, but hey, that's really what all these robes are. I wouldn't put this into S tier generally. It is one of the best robes in the game if you really truly know what you're doing, because it is twice the damage increase effectively from a blue robe. It is so much more reliable than like a Fury robe or an all robe. You don't have to build around it at all. It goes with literally any build, but on the flip side, you're pretty much not allowed to ever take any damage, and you certainly shouldn't get yourself stun locked into like a Freya attack, because you're dead. You're dead, boy. You're not gonna come back. Sorry. This thing is very good. Top of A tier, I would say. We'll probably never reach S tier, as it is just too damn drastic to cut down your health all the way, pretty much, just to achieve that slight boost in cooldown reduction and damage output overall. You could argue with me that this should be S tier because of something like an all robe being in S tier. Looking at that, I'd probably want to bump down the all robe a little bit, because crit chance is after all less reliable. When you do build around crit chance, all robe is a free win. When you don't, all robe is still baseline pretty damn strong, but so is Venture Robe, so I'd say these are around on the same level, maybe with Aura being a little better because it's definitely a safer pick than the Venture Robe overall. I don't have to try hard with the Aura at all. Moving on to our final entry on this visible list down here with the Fall Robe. The Fall Robe reduces your max health to 100 right out of the gates, but it grants you health regeneration. Your max health cannot be modified by relics. That means you will be stuck at 100 pretty much forever. But after 5 seconds of not taking damage, your health will rapidly regenerate, which is very nice. It's very, very strong, especially for players who absolutely know what they're doing, who never ever take damage from something like a Stomper, or get stun locked by a Lancer, get chained by a Rogue, get cornered by rogues, get chained by like a Frost Ranger, for example, or by a Mage, or by enemy summons. There are so many things that can take you out with this robe. You have to be incredibly good at the game, or you have to be a little dirty cheat or slut and run this plus limited edition robe or revive item as your starter relic. But even then, it's still very hard to bring a run home running this, unless of course you're playing boss rush, in which case at least you can comfort yourself knowing that, well, while running like a Double Trouble or other cursed relics, you're a one-shot anyway. Now this thing, it drastically gains value the more you play and the more experience you have in this game. Knowing certain things can be very beneficial, like not being able to be one-shot effectively, for example, right? Or when you would actually get one-shot and when you wouldn't, which items you can and can't pick up with this thing. This thing is pretty much the knowledge robe, I would say. Beside the level robe, which is more like the toy around with a build until you find a solution, this fall robe, it's just a get good until you find solutions version of the level robe. I would not consider this amazing because it simply isn't. It forces you to be on your toes at any given time. It's very similar to the Venture Robe in that. I would, however, consider this to be consistently very strong if you really, really know your stuff and you have an opportunity to build defensively, so you don't just wipe on like floor 3 or later down the line. It's really, really hard, especially when looping. This robe is just a huge disaster and very rough to toy around with. It cannot be upgraded, so unfortunately there's no more life regen or more max HP. You really have to be great to use this robe. Right, additionally to the icons that are actually on this tier list so far, we have a few extra robes that don't necessarily have their own icons, or that I find mention worthy, but they don't really contribute much to the overall game experience, with the Pride robe being next on my list. Really just a joke of a robe. This robe reduces your max health to 1 and disables all shields that you can acquire by any means, right? This is the worst robe in the game. No robe will ever be as bad as this one. This miners will say just, it kills you, straight up. Right, the second you enter your dungeon, you're dead. You fall into a pit once, you're dead. You get hit once, you're dead. You get tickled once, you're dead. You make a mistake once, you touch a trap, you're dead. You're just dead. It's that simple. You are dead. This is the robe. Pride robe is there only for the best of the best. It has no advantages whatsoever, only disadvantages and maximum disadvantages at that. Although you could argue that if you slap like level robe imbalances on here as well, this robe would by far be the most dangerous of a robe imaginable. Savile's robe, additionally, is sort of a secret robe that you can acquire by talking to Savile, I believe, after you have unlocked all the other robes in the game, with the exception of the final robe on the list here. Savile's robe is just another generalist type of all-rounder robe, and one with a bit of an oddball focus. It does, similarly to the Patience and Hope robe, grant you a 5% max health increase and a 10% on speed increase, which we've talked about previously plenty of times. That's pretty damn useless. And additionally, it also grants you a 5% evasion chance. Okay, that's nice. We've talked about that previously as well. And 10% cooldown reduction. So this is really just a compromise between the Patience, the Hope robe, and something that could be remotely considered useful. Cooldown reduction is a universally good stat in any given build, and that's already a much better incentive to ever go for this robe than the Hope and the Patience robe could ever bring forth. I would say overall this thing probably goes somewhere into like the middle of B tier. It is alright. It is alright at best, okay? It's nothing crazy. The thing is, he doesn't exactly give you the robe, okay? This doesn't exist. It doesn't have an icon, so I'm gonna be using Savile here as the icon. But instead, he will just modify the robe, whatever robe you currently hold, so pick your favorite color pretty much, and this works on pretty much all robes, and he will slap those effects on there for the current run, and then after that run, whatever robe you're currently having equipped will go back to normal. The 10 to 15% cooldown reduction I find a lot more notable than a lot of other low tier robes here, generally speaking. And finally we have the gimmick robe. Shadow robe. Shadow robe copies the stats of your previously equipped robe, providing only a visual change. So D tier all the way. Does literally nothing. If you haven't previously used a different robe, Shadow robe will do literally nothing, and thereby be as bad as a robe can be, beside a Pride robe pretty much killing you instantaneously. That is the tier list. Thank you very much for watching. My favorite robes, just a repetition here, are in order from top to bottom. The Temper robe up here, the beautiful, beautiful Fall robe over here, and then Fury robe. And you could, I guess you could include Venture robe and Grid or Spirit robe as well. I really love toying around with these. They are just absolute generalists, literal all-stars. Go with any build at all. You don't have to build around them. Just slap them on a build and they make it better. Usually you alternate between what you actually want for your build, what type of playstyle you want to cater towards by just choosing one of these. You could include, of course, the All robe and the Grid / Spirit robe, the counterpart. Additionally here, these are the playstyle robes, I would say, because you don't have to care about anything else. You can literally pick your poison. What do you want to have? What don't you want to have? In the case of Venture, for example, I don't want to have a lot of health, but I want to have cooldown reduction and damage increase, because I feel like this build lacks damage and it could definitely use some cooldown reduction, right? I want to have more fun, I want to have more run speed, yada yada yada. Just pick your poison playstyle. I love that shit. That having been said, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.